Please, don't let him sign that paper. The words slipped out of 8-year-old Nia Carter's mouth so softly that for a second, nobody in the marble lobby of the Montrose Hotel seemed to hear her. Then every head turned. The chandelier above them glowed warm against the polished floor, and at the center of it all stood Adrian Vale, the hotel's owner, tall and immaculately dressed, with a fountain pen hovering over a contract held open by his assistant. Nia stood near the front desk in a faded navy dress, her small backpack hanging from one shoulder, her braids tied with 2 bright yellow beads that clicked together when she moved. She had not come here to make a scene. She had come because her mother had taught her to notice the little things other people missed, and something about that silver pen, the one resting between Adrian's fingers, had made her stomach tighten. Adrian lowered the pen slightly and looked at her with the careful patience adults often gave to children they assumed were confused. "What did you say, sweetheart?" he asked. Nia swallowed and lifted her chin. "That pen has something inside it," she said. "I saw Mr. Hollis switch it at the desk. He smiled when you weren't looking." A few guests nearby exchanged polite, uneasy glances. Mr. Hollis, the assistant standing beside Adrian, let out a quiet laugh and adjusted his tie. "Sir, the child is mistaken," he said. "She probably saw me set out your office supplies." But Nia didn't step back. She reached into her backpack with both hands and pulled out a small notebook covered in stickers. "I wrote down the time," she said, "and I took a picture from the lobby chair. I wasn't trying to be nosy. I just knew something was wrong." Adrian's eyes moved from the girl to the notebook, then to the assistant's face. The room changed. Even the soft music drifting from the lounge seemed to thin out. He held out one hand. "Let me see," he said quietly. Nia walked forward with steady steps and placed the notebook in his palm. Adrian opened it, and the neat lines of handwriting, the small clock sketch, and the photo tucked between the pages told a story he had not expected to find in his own hotel. For the first time all morning, his expression lost its calm. He looked at Nia again, really looked at her, as if seeing not a child in a hotel lobby, but the one person in the building who had the courage to speak before it was too late. Nia stood still under the chandelier light, her small hands folded in front of her backpack, and the whole lobby waited for what he would do next. Adrian did not move for a long second. The lobby stayed perfectly still around him, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the comfortable silence of a luxury hotel. It was the kind that arrives when the truth stands in the room and no one knows where to hide. His assistant, Malcolm Reeve, kept his smile in place, but the color had drained from his face. Nia watched both men with the quiet focus of someone who knew she had already said the hardest part. Adrian lowered his eyes to the notebook again. The page with the time, the page with the sketch of the lobby camera, the page where Nia had written down exactly when Malcolm had switched folders near the front desk. It was not dramatic handwriting. It was careful, patient, the kind of record that came from a child who had paid attention when grown-ups assumed she was invisible. Adrian closed the notebook gently, as if even the paper deserved respect. "You said you saw him switch the folders," he said. Nia nodded once. "He put the blue one in your hand and kept the white one with the extra pages. Then he told the woman in the red coat to wait until you signed." Malcolm finally spoke, his voice light and polished. "Mr. Vale, this is a misunderstanding. The child is confused." Nia did not look away. "I am not confused," she said. "I watched from the chair by the fountain." He kept looking toward the glass doors like he wanted someone to come in before you read it. Adrian turned slightly. The morning light from the tall windows fell across the marble floor and caught the edge of the contract in Malcolm's hand. Something in the room had shifted, and everyone felt it. The front desk clerk stood frozen behind her computer. 2 guests near the elevators had stopped pretending to check their phones. Even the soft clink of cups from the hotel cafe seemed farther away now. Adrian held out his hand. "Give me the white folder," he said. Malcolm hesitated, just for a second, but Nia saw it. Adrian saw it too. The hesitation said more than any speech could have. Malcolm gave a small laugh, the kind meant to sound harmless. "You are letting a child create a problem where none exists." Adrian did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Then you will not mind if I review both copies with legal counsel." At that, the assistant's smile vanished. Nia felt her shoulders loosen a little. She had been standing very straight for so long that she had not realized how tired she was. Adrian noticed it. He stepped away from the counter and crouched to her level, careful and calm, so the top of his polished shoe disappeared under the edge of her backpack. "Did anyone tell you to do this?" he asked. Nia shook her head. "No, sir. I just knew your hand was shaking when you were about to sign. And people only do that when something is wrong." Something crossed Adrian's face then, quiet and deep, like a door opening in a house that had been locked for years. He looked at her notebook again, then at her face, and then toward the glass wall where his own reflection stood beside hers. For the first time that morning, he seemed to see his hotel not as a place of profit, but as a place where a child had chosen honesty over fear. "What is your full name?" he asked softly. "Nia Carter." "And where are you staying, Nia Carter?" She lifted one shoulder in a small shrug. "At the shelter on West 8th. But Miss Renee said I could stay until Sunday because the rain came in through the roof again." Adrian nodded once, his jaw tightening in a way that did not look angry so much as determined. He straightened and looked across the lobby. "Security," he said, calm but firm. "Please ask Mr. Reeve to remain here. And no one is to leave with any documents until my attorney arrives." Malcolm's face hardened. "Adrian, this is absurd." But Adrian was no longer listening to him. He was looking at Nia. "You were brave," he said. Nia's fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack. "I was just telling the truth." He smiled then, not the practiced smile of a businessman for cameras, but something warmer, something smaller and real. "That," he said, "is often the hardest thing." And as the lobby slowly began to wake around them, Adrian made a decision that would change the shape of the morning, the hotel, and the life of the little girl standing beneath the chandelier. The hotel lobby stayed hushed for a few more seconds, as if even the air needed time to catch up with what had just happened. Adrian Hart remained by the front desk, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the marble counter, his eyes moving from Malcolm Reeve to the small girl standing beneath the chandelier. Nia did not look like someone who had changed the direction of a morning. She looked like a child who had simply told the truth and was waiting to see what truth would cost. Adrian's voice, when it came, was calm and low. "What was on that paper?" he asked. Malcolm lifted his chin, but the confidence was gone from him now. "A routine donor agreement," he said quickly. "Nothing more." Adrian did not answer right away. He looked at the folder still sitting on the desk, then at the phone in Malcolm's hand, then back at Nia. "Read it again," he said. Slowly. Malcolm hesitated. The smallest crack appeared in his polished expression. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "It simply allows the foundation to shift temporary oversight of the shelter contract to my office for review." Nia's brows pulled together. She did not understand every word, but she understood the tone. It was the tone adults used when they were trying to make a trap sound harmless. Adrian saw that look in her face. He reached for the folder and turned one page over. On the bottom line, hidden beneath the neat print and a row of signatures, was a clause that would have quietly removed the shelter from Renee Johnson's control by the end of the week. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Temporary oversight," he said, his voice sharp now. "You were going to take the building before the end of the month." Malcolm gave a thin laugh that did not reach his eyes. "I was protecting your interests." "By lying to me?" Adrian asked. The lobby seemed to lean toward the exchange. A bellhop paused near the elevators. Two guests near the seating area lowered their voices. Nia held her backpack closer and stayed where she was, her small shoes planted firmly on the floor. Adrian exhaled once, then turned toward security. "Call my attorney and the foundation board," he said. "Right now." Malcolm's face changed completely. "You cannot do this in front of everyone." Adrian's answer was quiet. "I am doing it because everyone is here." Then he looked back at Nia. "How did you know?" he asked. Nia glanced down at the strap of her backpack. For the first time since the shouting had started, her voice turned shy. "Miss Renee reads forms out loud when new papers come in," she said. "She says some words are too big on purpose." Adrian stared at her, and something in his expression softened even more. This was not luck. This was a child who had learned to pay attention because adults had not always made room for her to be heard. "And you came all the way here to tell me?" he asked. Nia nodded once. "I thought if the paper got signed, the shelter would lose the kitchen room. And the kitchen room is where little kids eat when it rains." The words settled into the lobby like a weight. Adrian looked away for a second, and when he looked back, there was no business face left in him at all. "You probably saved more than a room," he said. His attention returned to the desk, to the papers, to the man who had nearly made the day belong to him. No one is to touch anything else until legal reviews every page. Malcolm took a step back, the mask fully gone now. Adrian, please. But Adrian's answer was already formed. You asked me to trust you, he said. I did. That was your mistake, not hers. Then he crouched just enough to meet Nia at eye level, careful and respectful, never crowding her. Would you be willing to come with me, he asked, and tell my attorney exactly what you saw? Nia looked at the tall man in front of her, then at the heavy doors of the lobby, then back at him again. The morning light had begun to brighten the glass wall behind them, washing the marble in a pale gold glow. Yes, sir, she said. And for the first time that morning, Adrian smiled like a man who had just found the one honest voice in the room. By the time Adrian Hart and Nia reached the quiet office corridor, the hotel had begun to look ordinary again, but nothing about the morning felt ordinary anymore. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows in soft strips, catching on the polished floor and the brass room numbers as if the building itself had decided to calm down. Nia walked beside him with careful steps, her backpack still tight against her shoulders, while Adrian kept his pace slow enough to match hers. He did not speak until they were inside the private office and the door had closed behind them with a gentle click. Then he turned to his attorney, who was already waiting with a legal pad in hand, and said, "Start from the beginning." Nia stood near the edge of a leather chair, not hiding, not shrinking, just watching with the same steady attention she had shown in the lobby. She described what she had seen in simple words, the kind a child uses when she knows something important has happened and does not want to get it wrong. She spoke about Malcolm Reeve, the briefcase, the page that had been turned too fast, and the way his hand had moved when he thought no one was looking. Adrian listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened once, then relaxed. Every so often, he glanced at Nia, not to pressure her, but to make sure she felt safe enough to keep going. When she finished, the attorney looked up and said quietly, "That is enough to stop the filing process until we verify every document." Adrian nodded once. "Do it now." Malcolm, who had followed them into the outer office, stepped forward with a strained smile that had already started to crack. "Adrian, this is a misunderstanding. A child saw something she did not understand." Nia lifted her chin before Adrian could answer. "I understood the part where he switched the pages," she said, her voice small but exact. The room went still. Adrian did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "And I understood the part where you were counting on no one noticing," he said. Malcolm's face lost its color. Adrian turned back to the attorney. "Have security hold the documents and escort Mr. Reeve out of the building," he said. "No drama. No scene. Just follow procedure." Then he looked toward Nia, who was still standing straight as a little judge in a school dress, and something in his expression softened. "You were brave," he told her. "Braver than most adults I know." Nia glanced down at her shoes for a second, then back up. "I just did not want somebody to get tricked," she said. Adrian gave a quiet nod, as if that answer mattered more than any legal explanation could. The attorney moved to make the first calls, the soft sound of dialing filling the office, and outside the glass wall the city continued its morning rush, unaware that inside this room a small girl had changed the course of a powerful man's day. Adrian stepped toward the window and looked out across the street, where buses moved through the early light and people hurried toward lives they could not see. Then he turned back, and there was a different kind of resolve in his face now, something cleaner than anger. "Nia," he said, "before any of this ends, I want to know who takes care of you." Adrian stayed by the window for a moment after asking the question, his reflection faint in the glass, the city moving quietly behind him like nothing important had happened. But in the office, everything had changed. Nia sat in a tall leather chair that swallowed her small frame, her backpack resting against her feet, while the attorney lowered himself into a seat across from her, as if he knew this conversation deserved care. A tray of untouched water glasses sat on the side table, catching the morning light, and the room felt softer now, less like a place for deals and more like a place for truth. Adrian returned to the table with measured steps and pulled out the chair beside Nia, instead of taking the one behind the desk. It was a small choice, but it changed the shape of the room. "You do not have to answer fast," he said. "And you do not have to answer alone." Nia looked at him, then at the manila folder open in front of the attorney. She could not read all of the words, but she understood enough to know this was the kind of paper grown-ups used when something mattered. Her fingers found the edge of her backpack strap, tracing the frayed seam there as she thought. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, and the sound rolled through the glass like distant thunder before fading back into the morning. "My aunt leaves early," Nia said at last. "Sometimes before the sun is all the way up. She works at a diner 2 blocks from our apartment. She says if I wake up and the kitchen light is on, then everything is okay." Adrian listened without interrupting. The attorney glanced down at his notes, then back up, ready to wait. "This morning," Nia continued, her voice still small but steadier now. "She told me to come here and stay in the lobby until she could call me. She said not to talk to strangers and not to go anywhere with anybody unless they said your name first." Adrian gave a slow nod. "That was good advice." Nia lifted her chin a little. "She is careful. She says careful people live longer." The corners of Adrian's mouth moved with the beginning of a smile, but he kept it gentle. "She sounds like someone who loves you very much." Nia looked down, and for a second the polished floor reflected the white collar of her dress and the small bow at the back of her braids. "She does," she said, "but she is tired a lot." The room grew quiet again, not in a heavy way, but in the way a church gets quiet before a prayer. Adrian folded his hands, then looked to the attorney. "Find me a way to make this safe, legal, and immediate," he said. "Whatever it takes." The attorney nodded once and began speaking about emergency guardianship, temporary arrangements, and the phone numbers that would need to be called first. Adrian listened, but his eyes kept returning to Nia, who was sitting very still, as if she understood this was bigger than her and yet somehow still involved her completely. When the attorney asked one final question about where she would feel comfortable waiting, Nia pointed toward the window seat where the sunlight had spread into a warm rectangle across the cushion. Adrian stood and offered his hand, not to pull her up, only to help if she wanted it. Nia placed her small hand in his, and together they walked to the window as the morning brightened around them. Below, the street traffic flowed in silver and black lines, and the lobby behind them filled slowly with the low sounds of a new day. Nia looked out at the city and whispered, almost to herself, "I did not want him to lose everything." Adrian heard her. He looked at her for a long second, and something in his face deepened with quiet understanding. "Maybe," he said softly, "what you saved was bigger than that." The attorney had barely finished speaking when the quiet of the office corridor settled into something heavier than silence. Nia stood beside the window seat with her hands folded in front of her backpack, watching the morning traffic below, as if the world outside might answer a question she had not yet asked aloud. Adrian remained near the doorway, one hand resting loosely at his side, his gaze moving between the legal papers on the desk and the small girl who had managed to change the direction of his entire morning. The city light was clearer now, sliding across the glass and touching the edges of the room in a soft gold that made everything feel temporarily gentler. After a few moments, the attorney cleared his throat and explained that the situation would need to be handled carefully, with proper records, a full review of the report, and immediate contact with the appropriate family services office. Adrian nodded once, but his attention never drifted far from Nia. She was too still, too composed for a child her age, and that only made him more aware of how much she had already been carrying before she ever stepped into his hotel. "You do not have to solve everything alone," he said at last, his voice low and steady. Nia looked up at him, and the first thing he saw in her face was not fear, but the effort it took to trust the moment. She gave a tiny nod, then glanced down at the floor again. The attorney asked if she had eaten that morning, and Nia hesitated before shaking her head. It was a small motion, but Adrian caught it immediately. He turned toward the desk phone, spoke quietly to the front office, and asked for a simple breakfast tray to be brought up without delay. No grand table, no ceremony, just warm food, fresh juice, and something easy to hold in small hands. When he hung up, he pulled a chair closer to the window seat, not crowding her, only making the room feel less empty. A few minutes later, a server arrived with a silver tray, and the smell of toast and scrambled eggs filled the office in a way that made the whole space seem suddenly human again. Nia looked at the tray like she had not expected kindness to arrive so directly. Adrian noticed the way her shoulders lowered by a fraction, the way her fingers loosened around the strap of her backpack. "Take your time," he said. "There is no hurry here." She sat down carefully, picked up the fork, and took one small bite. The morning outside kept moving, taxis gliding past the hotel entrance, pedestrians crossing with coffee cups in hand. But inside the room, time seemed to slow down on purpose. While Nia ate, the attorney spoke with Adrian in a quieter tone about the next steps, about documentation and temporary placement, and what would happen once the right authorities were reached. Adrian listened with the kind of attention he normally reserved for boardroom decisions. Except this time, every answer mattered in a different way. When the attorney mentioned that they would need statements from the people involved downstairs, Adrian's jaw tightened, but only briefly. He looked toward Nia and softened again. She had stopped eating for a moment and was staring at the paper napkin in her lap. "What is it?" he asked gently. Nia lifted her eyes and said, almost in a whisper, "I was afraid no one would believe me." Adrian did not answer right away. He simply let the words sit between them, honest and plain, because some truths did not need decoration. Then he nodded once and said, "I believe you." The room went very still after that. Not empty still, but safe still, the kind that gives a person room to breathe. Nia blinked hard, then looked back down at the tray. Adrian noticed something else then, a small silver chain around her neck with a tiny charm tucked beneath the collar of her shirt. He did not ask about it yet. He only filed it away in his mind, the way a man does when he senses that a detail may matter later. Outside the glass wall, the sun climbed a little higher, brightening the city in clean white light. Inside, Adrian sat down across from a little girl who had arrived as a stranger and was beginning, step by careful step, to become someone he would not let the world ignore. And for the first time since the lobby had erupted into confusion, the morning was no longer moving toward disaster. It was moving toward truth. By late morning, the office had settled into a quiet that felt almost sacred after the chaos of the lobby. Sunlight moved across the polished floor in long pale bands, and the city beyond the glass kept breathing as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Adrian sat in a leather chair across from Nia, his forearms resting loosely on his knees, while the attorney reviewed a few pages near the desk with careful, measured calm. Nia kept her backpack close and her silver chain tucked safely beneath the collar of her shirt, her small fingers resting against the fabric now and then as if the charm had a heartbeat of its own. Adrian noticed every little detail. He noticed the way she sat upright, even when she looked tired. He noticed that she answered only when she was certain. He noticed that she never tried to look small for anyone. "You can tell me anything," he said at last, his voice low enough to keep the room from feeling crowded. Nia lifted her eyes, studied him for a moment, and then nodded once. "My mom used to say people in nice buildings are not always nice," she said. "But she also said some people just need time to show who they really are." Adrian let out a slow breath, almost a smile, but not quite. There was something in those words that landed deeper than he expected. The attorney set the papers down gently and stepped back, giving them space. A soft knock came at the door a moment later, and a hotel staff member entered with a tray of fresh juice, sliced apples, and a warm roll still wrapped in cloth. Nia looked at it, then back at Adrian, as if waiting for permission to trust the kindness in front of her. "That is for you," Adrian said. "No tricks, just breakfast." She hesitated only a second before reaching for the roll. The first small bite seemed to settle something in the room. Adrian leaned back and studied the tiny charm again when it slipped into view for just a second. It was a delicate silver shape, simple but familiar in a way he could not explain. His gaze narrowed, not with suspicion, but with recognition that had not fully formed yet. "That necklace," he said carefully. "Who gave it to you?" Nia's fingers closed around it at once. "My mom," she said. "She told me to never lose it." Adrian nodded slowly. The answer did not solve anything, but it sharpened the edges of the mystery. He reached for the legal folder, then paused when his phone lit up on the desk. A message from his assistant flashed across the screen, followed by a scanned guest registry from 3 years ago, attached with one line, "You may want to see this." Adrian did not move right away. He looked at Nia first, then at the screen, and finally at the chain in her hand. The morning light in the room seemed to deepen, and for one quiet second, it felt as if the entire hotel had drawn a slow breath and was waiting with him. Adrian did not touch the phone right away. He kept his eyes on the scanned registry, then on Nia, and then back to the silver chain resting in her small hand. The room stayed still around them, but the quiet had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt charged, like the moment before a door opens. At last, he picked up the phone and called his assistant back on speaker. "Send the full file to my office now," he said, his voice calm but tighter than before. "And call the front desk. I want the original booking records from 3 years ago, plus every name attached to that weekend." Nia watched him with careful eyes, her backpack still tucked against her side. She did not speak. She only sat a little straighter, as if she understood that something important was finally moving. When the assistant answered, Adrian listened without interrupting. A few short confirmations. One pause. Then, "Yes," Adrian said quietly. "That is the name." He looked up at Nia again. "Your mother stayed here before, did she not?" Nia nodded once. "She said this hotel was where everything changed." Adrian leaned back slowly, the words settling over him. His expression did not become dramatic. It became thoughtful, almost gentle, as if he had just stepped onto the edge of a truth that had waited years to be found. He reached for the scanned page and traced one line with his finger. The guest's name matched a woman he had known long ago, though the details were still blurred by time and old grief. The chain in Nia's hand suddenly seemed less like a mystery and more like a thread leading somewhere real. "Did your mother ever say why she kept it?" he asked. Nia lowered her gaze. "She said it was the only thing left that could prove who I am." The words stayed in the air between them. Adrian's jaw tightened, not with anger, but with the weight of recognition. Outside the glass, a limousine rolled slowly through the hotel drive, and inside the room, the sunlight shifted across the floor as if the day itself had turned to listen. Then there was another knock at the door. This one was softer, more careful. The attorney stepped inside with a folder held close to his chest, and the look on his face told Adrian everything before a single page was opened. "Mr. Hart," he said, "the records confirm she was here. And there is something else you need to see." Adrian stood at once. Not fast, not startled, just fully, quietly alert. He turned toward Nia, and for the first time, the distance between them seemed to shrink. "You are not leaving this room alone today," he said, his tone steady and sure. Nia looked up at him, her eyes wide but calm. There was no fear in her face now, only a small, careful trust. And in that still, bright room above the city, Adrian understood that whatever truth was waiting in the folder, it had already begun changing both of their lives. The folder arrived just after noon, carried in by the attorney with both hands, as if the papers inside were more fragile than they looked. Adrian stood behind his desk when it was placed before him, while Nia remained near the window, one small hand still wrapped around the silver chain. Outside, the city shimmered in bright afternoon light, but inside the room, everything had narrowed to the folder, the chain, and the quiet that followed every page turned. Adrian opened it slowly. The first sheet was a registry copy from years ago, the ink faded in places, but still clear enough to read. The second was a photo taken at the hotel long before the present day, and the third was a handwritten note from a staff member who had since retired. Adrian did not speak at first. His jaw tightened once, then relaxed. He read the same line twice, then a third time, as if repetition could make the truth less startling. "She came here with a woman named Elena," the attorney said carefully. "She was checking in under a temporary name. After that, there was a disruption in the service corridor, and the records stopped for nearly an hour." Adrian looked up, and then, the attorney hesitated, and then the woman left the property without the child. Nia's fingers closed a little tighter around the chain, but she did not step back. She only watched Adrian with the steady patience of someone who had already carried too many questions for too long. He turned the photo toward her. In it, a younger woman stood beside the hotel lobby fountain, smiling with one arm around a little girl no older than Nia. The chain on the child's neck matched the one in Nia's hand. Adrian's voice softened. "Do you recognize her?" Nia studied the picture. A small breath left her lips. "That is my mother," she said. The words settled into the room like snowfall, quiet and final and impossible to ignore. The attorney lowered his eyes. Adrian leaned back slightly, then reached for the next page in the folder. It was a contact form, old but legible, with a phone number written in careful script. He stared at it for a long moment before making a decision. "Call this number," he said. The attorney nodded and stepped into the hall. Adrian remained standing, one hand resting on the edge of the desk, the other open at his side. When he looked at Nia again, there was no distance left in his expression, only care. You have been carrying this alone, he said. You do not have to do that anymore. Nia blinked once, and the room seemed to hold its breath with her. Then Adrian picked up the chain from her palm and examined the clasp. Inside the tiny metal charm was an engraving so small it had been missed at first glance. 2 letters. E. H. Adrian's eyes changed. He looked from the chain to the registry, then back to the child standing beside the window. Nia, he said slowly, this is not just a keepsake. It is a key. She looked up at him. To what? He turned the chain in his hand until the afternoon light caught the engraving again. To the truth, he said. And I think someone has been hiding it for a very long time.